Dom Giordano on Talk Radio 1210 WPHT.
All right, big issues, big guest. We haven't had him on the show. I know Rich had him here for a speaker series, and he's wearing two hats. He's a great guest and a guy that's really you can take to the bank on any of these issues. As we hear now, I told you this frightening scenario of some of these conservative business guys. We're trying to get this guy on an Easton on. We talked about him yesterday, if you missed yesterday's show, saying, yeah, Medicare for all. That way his business gets out from under providing health care. And there's these various alliances, and to me they're useful tools of those on the left who want to take over health care, not so much to cut costs, but to have more control, more rationing, more government shenanigans. Joining us is Senator Tom Coburn, Senior Advisor, Convention of States. I'm going to ask him about that first. Of course, former U.S. Senator from Oklahoma. One of the key talking points he has, I believe in, everybody should, I would think, prevention should be America's national health care policy. Yep, that's it right there. It's got several spokes to that. Senator Tom Coburn, back here in Philadelphia. Hey, Senator, welcome back. Thank you for joining us today.
It is a pleasure to be back on. How are you?
Very well. So I wanted to ask you about your work here. Rich had you to town, a great night at Speaker Series. Your work with the Convention of States. I know it's a difficult process with a lot of enemies out there. How's that going?
Well, we added 3 states so far this year. We'll probably add 1 or 2 more. Should get us to 17, halfway there. Excited about it. Just introduced in Pennsylvania now, so we have it introduced in both houses, and we will be working in Pennsylvania aggressively. Both myself and Mark Meckler, as well as our lead co-sponsors, work that through the House and the Senate, and expect it to pass in Pennsylvania. It's one of those things the governor doesn't have to sign. It's what the legislature decides.
Well, good luck with that. I don't have a lot of faith in these Republicans in Harrisburg. I'm glad to hear you're getting something done. Give us, would you, the shorthand of that. A lot of listeners know what that's about and how important it is, but what's the definition of Convention of States?
Well, let me give a little background first to it, if I may. 60% of Pennsylvania's money they raise in their state, all right, at the state level, isn't controlled by your state legislature. It's controlled by bureaucrats in Washington that were never elected to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
But they're mandated to have to spend money in a certain way because some bureaucrat wrote a rule that way. So our problem in our country, I believe, is we've ignored the enumerated powers that are in the Constitution. Those powers are supposed to be limited for the federal government. This isn't about states' rights. This is about freedom. Where should we make the decisions for people in Allentown as far as their city's concerned? At their city?
No, at the city level, yes. At Allentown level, yeah, exactly.
But you know what? Half those decisions are made by some bureaucrat in Washington. So the question is how do we restore our Constitution to what it really meant so that we actually have the maximum amount of freedom that was intended for us to have? And the only tool to do that is what our founders gave us in the Constitution, which is Article 5, which allows the states to call a convention for amendments. And our 3 areas are to restore the Constitution. One is to force the federal government to make financial decisions that are prudent instead of borrowing against our children's future every day. The second is to limit the terms of both elected and appointed officials. And the third is to restore the constitutional principles of the Commerce Clause, the General Welfare Clause, and the Necessary and Proper Clause, who have been changed by 5-4 decisions of the courts. No legislative bodies did that.
Mm-hmm.
Our founders never intended that, but the courts have changed that. And what that's done is concentrate power in Washington, especially at the level of courts.
Something you said, Senator Coburn, I wanted to underline, too, that I think is important. It's bad enough if some guys like you, when you were a senator in Oklahoma, if you're voting on what's good for Allentown, but these are people that are there forever, that are not beholding, writing these rules that Congress has allowed them to usurp, and they grow every day.
Right. They have transferred their power
Yes.
to the executive branch and allowed the administrative state to run this country. And it's totally, I'm 71 years old, but it is totally different than it was 50 years ago. And most people don't recognize it because they don't know history.
Yep.
We now have an administrative state that is now telling us it's kind of like the old Soviet Union. If you're part of that administrative state, you've got a job forever, you've got a tremendous retirement, and you tell people what to do regardless of what the Constitution
with
says.
the full power of the federal government often.
Right, and
Yeah.
they have an unlimited budget to hire lawyers to make you do what they want done, and you have a limited budget to defend yourself.
Absolutely.
So the whole idea is to restore our Constitution and rebalance the power among the three branches of the federal government, but also rebalance the power between the states and the federal government. Remember, the Constitution says everything outside of the enumerated powers is left to the people in the states, not the bureaucrats.
Exactly
It's
right.
left to us in the states.
Now,
So that's what we're hoping to achieve. It's not a revolution. It's a restoration.
That's well put. Now, while that's going on, the other side now is talking about Medicare for all. And the frightening thing to me is, of course, the cost. But that's secondary. It comes back to this issue of freedom, rationing, utopian thinking, authoritarianism. And it seems to be, we talked yesterday, and listeners were really on top of this, Senator. There's this cadre now of business people, allegedly moderate Republican conservative, that are going along with some of the more radical elements to say they want out of this arrangement of providing health care. They want Medicare for all, and they're standing with them in Washington and trying to do this.
Well, as a practicing physician for 35 years, as somebody who trained in a VA hospital, like most doctors do, you ask any doctor who isn't a VA doctor whether they would ever send a family member or patient to a VA hospital, and you'll get a unanimous no. And why is that? Because there's no accountability. There's no transparency. So if we want Medicare for all, just expect to get the same kind of stories as we get out of the VA system and the Indian health system. Those are completely government-run organizations whose outcomes are poor, generally, and whose costs are excessive, and who treat patients like a commodity instead of individuals. So I understand the greed, the corporate greed, but here's the thing to think about. We spend at least 25 to 30% more than we should be spending for health care. The average deductible is $5,900 for the cheapest plan now in America. What if you could get 30% of that off and put in your pocket? What if that could happen? What if we could quit? The studies show anywhere from $400 billion to $1.1 trillion. That's the Institute of Medicine's number, the government agency that looks at quality of care and health care. $1.1 trillion per year that doesn't help anybody get better and doesn't keep anybody from getting sick. So why do we have this system that we have today? Because we have a bunch of feeding corporate middlemen, crony capitalists who come into the healthcare system and take money out. And let me just we're just getting ready to publish this. This is new for your radio show. The nonprofit hospitals, the 84 largest nonprofit hospitals in America last year, increased their net asset value by 20% last year.
Wow.
$21 billion. So these are nonprofits. Their whole goal is to not make any money. Their whole goal is to serve the community, to do charity work. Why are they making $21 billion a year off the least of these people who can barely afford to pay their copays and deductibles?
Well put.
So
Now, go ahead.
That's a question we ought to be asking. What's wrong with the system that does that?
Absolutely.
The reason it happens
Okay.
is because nobody knows the price they're going to pay for health care until after they bought it.
Exactly. Now, one of the things that I know you're on to, and I know a little bit your own story, and Mike Huckabee comes on the show a good bit over the years, is that prevention should be America's national health care policy.
Absolutely.
Huckabee was talking. See, when people hear that, though, Senator, I think they think in terms of just medical checkups and all that. It's a lot more. It's about figuring out ways to get people knowledge and motivated to exercise, to do the right thing. I'm not talking about government dragooning them into it. That, to me, would undercut these medical costs tremendously if we were onto that. Huckabee's onto it. I know you are, too.
Well, look, we see differentials in healthcare premiums for people that smoke, don't we?
Yes.
Cost more. If you have a body mass index that's high, you're going to start seeing a differential in that because you consume a whole lot more because you won't have the willpower to control your BMI. So the question really isn't that as personal. Well, you can put all that into it, and we could save a ton of money if our goal was prevention, the best care at the lowest price with the best outcomes. That ought to be our goal. And the government can incentivize that, but you can't do any of that till you create real market awareness of what comes cost. In my hometown, Tulsa, Oklahoma, if you get an MRI of your back, you can pay $2,700 or you can pay $500. Because people don't know you can pay $500, they end up paying $2,700.
Mm-hmm.
So why is that? That's because the corporate greed doesn't. And by the way, that $2,700 is at a nonprofit hospital, right?
Well, exactly.
And the $500 is at a for-profit outpatient radiology center. So tell me how it costs 5.5 times to have the same test read by the same radiologist at two different places.
Doesn't make any sense.
Because there's no price awareness.
Exactly.
And no market forces forcing them to compete. And the insurance company doesn't want price awareness. The pharmaceutical companies, the pharmacy benefit managers, the medical home health, the durable health equipment, none of the large groups that are taking and sucking money out of healthcare but aren't giving back want price discovery because they know what will happen is we'll start getting better value and better health care for a whole lot less money.
Senator, thank you. Thanks for joining us again. And where do people find all the things that you're involved, particularly Convention of the States here in Pennsylvania, but what you have to say on healthcare? Where do they go?
Two things. One is you can go to openthebooks.com. You can start looking at that. That's a transparency site on the federal government. And we'll be publishing this month on the hospitals, on the nonprofit. But you can see that. And then you can go to conventionofstates.com. Help us restore the balance of power. And your listeners, if they'll call their state legislators and say, I want you to co-sponsor Convention of States and start putting pressure because they're going to listen to their constituents. They're not going to listen to me. They're going to listen to the people they represent. And if your listeners will go and do that, we'll get it passed in Pennsylvania.
Senator, thank you very much. You're a true patriot and post your time in the Senate. I admire very much your work. Thanks for joining us.
You bet. Great to be with you.
Tom Giordano, weekdays 9 till noon on Talk Radio 1210 WPHT.
Go to conventionofstates.com, press the button, sign the petition. More importantly, get 10 of your friends to do the same. When you sign the petition, then that sends a letter to your state legislator. You go on the list in their district as a supporter. We deliver those lists to the state legislators. It means something to them.